I never told my son-in-law I used to be a Navy SEAL. For 3 years, Derek Whitfield, my daughter's husband, a man who wore his confidence like cologne, a little too much of it, applied a little too often, looked at me and saw exactly what he wanted to see. A soft, graying 68-year-old who puttered around his garden, forgot where he put his glasses, and needed help carrying groceries up 2 steps. He was frozen the night everything changed, standing in my daughter's hallway with his hands raised, staring at me like he'd never actually looked at me before. Because he hadn't. Not really. Not until I moved. But to understand how it came to this, you have to go back to a Tuesday evening in early spring, to a dinner table where Derek was mid-sentence, explaining, again, how some of us understand what real pressure feels like. I'd been at that table plenty of times before, mostly quiet, mostly amused. My daughter, Emily Whitfield, 34 years old, a pediatric nurse with more grit in her little finger than most people carry in their whole body, had married Derek 5 years earlier. He worked in commercial real estate, closed big deals, talked about leverage and risk tolerance the way other men talk about football scores. He wasn't cruel, not exactly. He was just the kind of man who measured other men by resumes he could read at a glance, titles, salaries, gym memberships, and I never gave him anything to measure. I liked it that way. 26 years in the Navy, 18 of them as a SEAL, for deployments I don't talk about at dinner parties, will teach you that the most dangerous thing in a room is rarely the loudest voice in it. I let Derek believe I was harmless. It cost me nothing, and it told me everything about him. That Tuesday, he was going on about a break-in 2 streets over from his office, some story about a security guard who froze up, and he looked right at me, smiling the way he always smiled when he was about to say something he thought was clever but knew was cruel, and said, "No offense, Frank, but if someone came through that door right now, I don't know what you'd do besides ask them to wipe their feet." Everyone laughed. Emily gave a tight, apologetic smile that I'd learned to recognize, the one she wore whenever Derek said something about me, and she didn't have the energy to fight it that day. My internal ledger, the one I never speak of and never stop keeping, added one more line to a column that had been filling for years. The time he told the neighbors I used to work in logistics when I mentioned my old job. The time he helped me carry a 50-pound bag of mulch like I was made of glass. The time he laughed, not unkindly, when I said I still ran 3 miles most mornings. Good for you, Frank. Gotta keep the blood moving at your age. Small things. Harmless things, if you only counted them one at a time. I didn't count them one at a time. I said nothing that night. I never did. I finished my dinner, thanked Emily for the meal, and drove home to the house I'd lived in alone since her mother passed 6 years back. And that's the story you'd have gotten if you'd stopped watching right there. An old man, quietly shrinking under a younger man's condescension, absorbing it because that's what old men are supposed to do. But that isn't who I was. That was never who I was. The truth is, while Derek was closing deals and telling stories about pressure, I had spent the better part of 3 decades in places I still can't fully describe to civilians, doing work that required me to be unreadable, unremarkable, and completely underestimated on purpose. Being dismissed was a skill I trained for. Being invisible in a room was a tool, not a wound. I retired as a Command Master Chief, having run training pipelines for young SEALs who are now instructors themselves. Having been trusted with operations, I signed away the right to discuss the day I put the uniform back in its bag for the last time. I kept a small circle. My old teammates, the ones still living, called twice a year, my birthday, and the anniversary of a mission none of us talk about, but all of us remember. To them, I wasn't Frank who does logistics. I was Doyle. And when Doyle showed up, rooms got quiet in a completely different way than they did around Derek's jokes. Emily knew all of it. She'd grown up watching me leave for months at a time, watching her mother field the calls that came at strange hours, watching me come home changed in ways a child understands before she has words for it. When she was 9 years old, after a break-in 2 doors down rattled the whole street, her mother and I taught her something most kids never learn, a code word. Not a cute family joke. A real, deliberate signal, drilled the way I drilled young operators. If she was ever in danger, ever afraid in a way she couldn't explain over the phone, she would say one specific phrase, and I would know, not guess, know, that she needed me. Immediately, no questions, no delay. Blue compass. We used it exactly once when she was 17, at a party that went sideways. I was there in 11 minutes. She never had to use it again. Not for 17 years. I watched Emily's marriage from a careful distance, the way you watch weather rolling in, not panicking, just tracking it. Derek wasn't a monster. He didn't raise his voice, didn't raise a hand. His weapon was smaller and, in its way, harder to fight. He made her feel like her family, especially her father, was a rung she'd climbed past. He'd correct her stories about my career mid-sentence with a version he'd invented to be more palatable at dinner parties. Logistics, some kind of Navy desk job. He didn't ask. He decided. And Emily, exhausted from 12-hour hospital shifts and unwilling to fight a war over her father's ego, let the smaller version stand. I understood why. I never asked her to defend me. I defended myself in rooms far more dangerous than that dining room. And I'd do it again the only way that had ever mattered, with proof, not protest. So I waited. Not out of weakness. Out of discipline. You do not spend your career learning patience and then throw it away over a dinner table joke. I kept my body sharp in ways Derek never noticed, because he never really looked. 3 miles most mornings wasn't nostalgia, it was maintenance. I kept 2 numbers memorized that had nothing to do with logistics. And I kept Blue Compass exactly where it had always lived, in the back pocket of a relationship built on trust so old it didn't need to be spoken about, only honored. The call came on a Thursday night in October, 4 months after that dinner. Emily texted me at 9:47 p.m. 2 words. Blue Compass. I didn't call to ask what was wrong. I didn't text back a question mark. 17 years hadn't dulled a single second of what that phrase meant. I was in my truck in under 90 seconds, and I was moving through the quiet strategy I'd rehearsed in my head 1,000 times without ever hoping I'd need it. Route to her house. Entry points I'd noted every single time I'd visited, and Derek thought I was just an old man admiring his landscaping. The location of the spare key I'd insisted, years ago, on keeping just in case, over Derek's mild, amused objection. My old teammate, Marcus Ruiz, a man who'd pulled me out of worse situations than a suburban Thursday night, a man who still worked private security consulting and lived 20 minutes closer to Emily's house than I did, got one text from me. Blue Compass. Emily's address. 10 minutes out. He didn't ask questions either. That's what it means to have people who actually know who you are. I arrived to find Emily's front door unlocked and ajar, a sound coming from inside that I recognized before my conscious mind caught up, the particular, wrong silence of a house where someone doesn't belong, followed by a man's raised voice that wasn't Derek's. I moved through that door the way I'd moved through 100 doors before, and every ounce of what Derek Whitfield had spent 5 years mistaking for harmlessness came forward at once, quiet and absolute. He was in the hallway when I came in. Derek, backed against the wall near the kitchen, a stranger between him and Emily, and Derek's face doing something I'd genuinely never seen it do before, registering fear it had no idea how to process. The intruder turned toward the movement at the door, and I want to be honest with you, because this story only means something if I am. What happened next took 11 seconds. 11 seconds of instinct that 26 years had carved so deep into my hands and feet that my conscious mind was almost a spectator. Controlled distance closed. A wrist redirected before a weapon he was holding could come level. Weight and leverage doing what strength alone never could. The man was on the floor, restrained, breathing hard, absolutely not going anywhere, before Derek had finished exhaling the breath he'd sucked in when I came through the door. Marcus arrived 90 seconds later, calm as a man arriving for coffee, and between the two of us, the scene was controlled, secured, and handed off to responding officers with the kind of clean, procedural clarity that made one of the younger patrol officers ask, only half joking, if I used to be some kind of cop. I told him no. I told him the truth, for the first time in front of my son-in-law, in 6 flat words, retired Navy. Command Master Chief. SEAL. Derek didn't say anything for a long time. He stood in his own hallway, hands still slightly raised from where they'd gone up on instinct, staring at me like a man recalculating every conversation he'd ever had at that dinner table. Emily was in my arms, shaking, not from fear of the moment that had just passed, but I think from something else too. The release of finally not having to translate her father into a version her husband could accept. She didn't say I told you so. She didn't have to. I felt it in the way she held on. The official report, when it came through days later, did what my daughter's loyalty and my own quiet pride never could. It made it undeniable in ink. Responding officers noted a controlled restraint by a bystander with identified prior military special operations training, and Marcus, when a detective asked how he'd arrived so fast and known exactly what to do, said only, "Master Chief Doyle called." That's all the information I needed. Derek read that report over my shoulder at Emily's kitchen table 2 days later, and I watched something shift in his face permanently. Not just fear correcting itself into respect, but 5 years of small cruelties collapsing under the weight of a single, undeniable fact he could no longer edit into something more comfortable for himself. He apologized that week, and I want to tell you it was a groveling, dramatic thing, but it wasn't. It was quieter, and I think more honest for it. He sat across from me on Emily's porch, turned a coffee mug in his hands for a while before he spoke, and said he'd spent 5 years deciding who I was without ever once asking. He said he was ashamed of the jokes. He said he understood now why Emily used to go quiet when he told his version of my career instead of hers. I told him the truth. I'd let him believe what he wanted to believe, because being underestimated had kept me alive more times than I could count, and I'd simply never seen a reason to correct him. I wasn't looking for an apology. I'd stopped needing one a long time before he offered it. Things didn't become perfect overnight, and I want to be honest about that too, because perfect isn't the same as real. Derek and I aren't close in the way movies like to wrap these things up. We don't golf together. We don't tell war stories over beer. But he asks now. He asks about the men I served with, about Marcus, about what Command Master Chief actually meant day to day, and he listens to the answers instead of writing his own version in his head. He stopped correcting Emily's stories about me at dinner tables. He started telling people, when it came up, that his father-in-law was a retired Navy SEAL, and he said it with something that sounded, for the first time, like pride instead of performance. I still run 3 miles most mornings. Derek jogs with me sometimes now, badly, gasping around mile 2, and I let him, because it's not really about the running. Emily texted me a few months later, not Blue Compass, just a photograph of her and Derek at a barbecue, my ridiculous garden hat perched on his head, both of them laughing at something out of frame. Underneath it she wrote, "He finally sees you, Dad." I didn't need him to see me. I never had. But it's a good thing, all the same, when the people you love stop measuring the ones who love them by the wrong ruler. I let Derek believe I was just a harmless old man for 5 years, and it cost me nothing, because the people who actually needed to know who I was already did. If you've ever been underestimated by someone in your own family, or watched them find out the hard way exactly who they'd been dismissing, I want to hear it. Tell me your story in the comments, and let's see how many of us have been quietly proving people wrong all along.